Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jannavalabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jannavalabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Hare Krishna. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 12, which is entitled Creation of the Kumaras and Others, texts 1 through 3, and we'll be focusing primarily on text 2. So we'll read everything together, the Sanskrit.
We just do this for the verse number 2.
Oh, just
and
two.
Use translation for 3.
Okay.
That's not right chapter. Oh, chapter 12. Thank you for that.
So just the translations first.
1 to 3.
Okay, so we'll read together the translations.
We need to do one verse.
Okay, one verse at a time. Sri Maitreya said, O learned Vidura, so far I've explained to you the glories of the form of the personality, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his feature of Kala. Now you can hear from me about the creation of Brahma, the reservoir of all Vedic knowledge.
Brahma first created the nascent engagements like self-deception, the sense of death, anger after frustration, the sense of false ownership, and the illusory bodily conception or forgetfulness of one's real identity.
Seeing such a misleading creation as a simple task, Brahma did not feel much pleasure in his activity, and therefore he purified himself by meditation on the personality of Godhead. Then he began another term of creation.
So what do you do next? Okay, for the second verse, right? Or all? Okay, second verse. Sasargre nandathamishram attathamishramadikrit mahamoham cha tamascha jnanavrittayaha. Sasagrade nidam Anyone else? Word for word together. Okay. Sasarja, created. Agre, at first. Andatameshram, the sense of death. Ata, then. Tameshram, anger upon frustration. Adikrit, all these. Mahamoham, ownership of enjoyable objects. Cha, also. Moham, conception. Cha, also. Tamaha, darkness and self-knowledge. Cha, as well as. Agyanam, nescience. Vrittaya, engagements. So again, we'll read the translation and we'll read the purport. Would you like to read? Something to get a little custom. Yeah, English.
Translation. Brahma first created the nescient engagements like self-deception, the sense of death, anger after frustration, the sense of false ownership, and the illusory bodily conception, or forgetfulness of one's real identity. Purport. Before the factual creation of the living entities in different varieties of species, the conditions under which a living being in the material world has to live were created by Brahma. Unless a living entity forgets his real identity, it is impossible for him to live in the material conditions of life. Therefore, the first condition of material existence is forgetfulness of one's real identity. And by forgetting one's real identity, one is sure to be afraid of death, although a pure living soul is deathless and birthless. This false identification with material nature is the cause of false ownership of things, which are offered by the arrangement of superior control. All material resources are offered to the living entity for his peaceful living, and for the discharge of the duties of self-realization in conditioned life. But due to false identification, the conditioned soul becomes entrapped by the sense of false ownership of the property of the Supreme Lord. It is evident from this verse that Brahma himself is a creation of the Supreme Lord. And the 5 kinds of nescience which condition the living entities in material existence, the creation of Brahma. It is simply ludicrous to think the living entity should be equal with the Supreme Being, when one can understand that the conditioned souls are under the influence of Brahma's magic wand. Patanjali also accepts that there are 5 kinds of nescience, as mentioned herein.
Om Ajnantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasade Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Nice to be with all of you. Hare Krishna. This section of Srimad Bhagavatam, there are several sections of the Bhagavatam that talk about creation of the whole material universe, material existence. And it may seem like it's very far away from us. And we might think, well, how does this help me when I hear about how creation unfolds? But there's a law that exists. And it's described in many different spiritual traditions. But whatever is happening on a cosmic level, on a higher level, that same pattern exists on a lower scale and lower level. You know? Just think of like the planets and the sun in the sky. It's cosmic. It's out there in space. But then think of atoms. The atom's also like a little sun and also has, other little atomic particles that are circling it. So somehow, the way the creation is, whatever exists way out there in terms of cosmic reality, it's also true of us. That's why in the Vedas, the person is called Chudra Brahmanda, which means a small universe. There's the big universe, and then there's you and me. We're like small universes. There's a term for that, Chudra Brahmanda. So in Sanskrit, these terms are samasti and vyasti. Samasti is like the large, the complete whole. And vyasti is the same thing, but it's a particle of that. So when we hear about creation and how it unfolds, it's also self-knowledge for us. Because everything that exists in the universe also exists within us. For example, when the elements start to come, we heard in the last few chapters describing Mahavishnu and how he glances upon the material energy. It's called pradhan. It's completely invisible. There's no movement. There's no attributes, but it's like a field of potential, a material field of potential. And Vishnu glances onto this field of potential, and then things start to come out. Elements start to come. So what comes out? Earth, eventually. Earth, water, fire, these big elements. But these are also inside of us, right? We have earth, we have water, we have fire. And then even the subtle things that come out. There's something called the Mahatattva, which is also like a very fine, subtle energy that exists everywhere. That also exists within me. It's called the Chitta. So on a large scale, cosmic, and then also on a small scale, because I'm also like a small universe, all this. So everything we're learning about creation is self-knowledge. It's actually beneficial for us to try to understand how we exist, what caused our existence, and to start to examine our mechanism so that we can actually free. We can, by the grace of others, devotees, by Krishna's grace, we can start to understand what is true self-knowledge and then learn what it means to actually release ourselves from material conceptions, material consciousness. So I just want to point that out at first, because when we hear this creation and it just seems like, well, how can I verify any of this? How is it even helping me spiritually? But we should see that whatever is true out there in creation, we hear all the different realms, those are also inside of me. So it becomes very significant, these sections. That's why the Bhagavatam talks about creation 3 or 4 times. In the 2nd canto, 3rd canto, 11th canto, we keep hearing about how creation unfolds. This is actually relevant for us. And this section here is about the secondary creation. First, I mentioned Mahavishnu. He glances upon the material energy and the elements come. And then at some point, Lord Brahma is born from Vishnu. And then he takes over the creation. And from that point on, it's called the secondary creation. So he's not really the creator Brahma, but he's empowered by the Lord to create as a service. So he's a great being. Brahma is said to be made of intelligence. You know, we're made of earth, water, we have mind, we have intelligence, some intelligence, we have ego. Lord Brahma, it said that his body is made of intelligence, because he, just imagine, just look at all the complexities of material nature. He's arranging for it all. So he's a very powerful being. And he begins to create, and that's what we're hearing here. How he creates and what he creates first. Before he creates all the living beings, we're hearing in the 2nd verse here. First, he creates the conditions for those living beings to be born into. It's very interesting. You know, first, we're called conditioned souls. Prabhupada would use that. So here, in this verse, are the 5 conditions. This is why we're called conditioned souls. There's 5 conditions that, before we're even born, they will come immediately over our consciousness and cover us. Fear of death. So we'll talk about those 5 conditions. Anything you want to add? So these 5 conditions, they're found throughout the Vedic scriptures, not just here in Bhagavatam. Different names sometimes are used, different ways of expressing them. But as Prabhupada points out at the end of the purport, these are also found in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. You've heard of the Yoga Sutras? It's a pretty amazing book also about psychology, but spiritual psychology, like meta psychology. Psychology, nowadays we have little issues and we're trying to work them out and get to a more healthy place. But the psychology of the scriptures like Bhagavatam and Yoga Sutras, it's like even before you have those little habits and bad, you know, those tendencies, what's really behind that? What's caused that? What's caused you to take birth in this material world? So it's very deep, because however we adjust ourselves on our own psychologically, we're really just adjusting ourselves within the 3 modes of nature. It's all material, but goodness is a little better than passion. You've heard of the 3 modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. So us just working on ourselves and getting help from others who are working on ourselves, we're just sort of moving around in the modes of nature, hopefully coming up to goodness, because life will be a little better if we're in the mode of goodness. More peace, more knowledge, contentment. But what's lacking in many of these psychological systems is the very, very, very deep root of it all. What's caused all of it? How did I even end up here in this material world under this consciousness? So these 5, they're also called the 5 kleshas. Klesha, it's coming from the verbal root klish, which means to afflict. So in the Yoga Sutras, they talk about the 5 kleshas, the 5 afflictions, or the 5 obstacles to what? To realizing yourself and realizing God. So they're very important. This second verse is a very big verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam that we're looking at today.
Yes, these five kleshas, the avidya, the ignorance, may unfold in this particular way, but we can also see them sometimes they're simultaneous. So we have the avidya, which is ignorance, is first. And then asmita, identification with body and mind. Because once I am ignorant of my true self, then I start to identify with this body. So everybody is in a body in this room, and so I am this body and what I want. My mind, not only the body, but also the mind. What I'm thinking. I am my thoughts, I am my feelings. If I feel this way, then that is who I am. If I feel a certain way. Then there is raga, attachment, dvesha, aversion, and then adinivesha, the fear of death. And so fear of death is almost concomitant with avidya, this ignorance that Prabhupada mentions in the purport, that although by forgetting one's real identity, one is sure to be afraid of death, although a pure living soul is deathless and birthless. And this fear of death is very obviously in the sense of I'm going to lose my body, I'm going to die. But beneath even that loss of the body is the fear of the loss, period. Loss of relationships, especially, because if I lose this relationship, it's gone forever. And I was thinking, we were discussing this morning how our 2-year-old son, he has no fear of death because he doesn't know what death is. And we're like, it's kind of like a pure state of being that he's just totally unaware, but in some way he's ignorant because he doesn't realize that he will die. But then we were saying there's an even deeper ignorance because actually he's not going, he doesn't die. So he's ignorant of the fact that he will die, this material body will die, but then and there's also ignorance below that the soul never dies. So it's multiple levels. But ultimately to awaken fully means that to understand the reality of this material world and the conditions that I'm under, and then to transcend that by understanding the truth. And that's why we're all here today. And also about with children is the sense that they haven't developed this raga and dvesha, this attachment and aversion. I mean, there's some very obvious attachment and aversion. You can even see it in babies and children. At the same time, it hasn't calcified. It hasn't become so intense and strong. Those ropes are not so strong. And, it's this meditation on death is prevalent in all spiritual traditions because it's about prioritization, what is most important, what matters, and trying to let go of the things that don't serve my eternal purpose. And we're meditating also how sometimes with children who have some terminal illness, even at say St. Jude Hospital, sometimes they're so brave, they're able to face it with a certain level of bravery and resilience. But at the same time, they also haven't lived life to that extent where they've developed that raga and dvesha, that attachment and aversion. All of it is connected, that they have so much to let go of. They haven't developed it so much, so letting it go is easier in some ways. Some children have a kind of irrational fear of death. It's strong for them, but you could almost say it's irrational at that age because they haven't developed that attachment so strongly. And so it's more the parents that have to go through the grief and the loss. So that fear of death, this adinivesha, is not just about the material body. It's understanding the reality that we have a spiritual body that is eternal, but also relationships that are eternal.
As soon as we forget, have no realization that we're eternal beings, then we have to identify. We have the soul actually has identity. It's called ahamta. Ahamta, there's the false ego is called ahankar, but the real sense of I am an individual is called ahamta. So that's true. That's of the soul. But when we forget When that gets covered over, that I'm an eternal soul, part of God. Krishna says in the Gita, Mamai Vamso, Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. Jiva Loke, the living beings of this world, Mamai Vamso, they are my parts. Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, and their existence is eternal. So this is Jiva Tattva. This is the understanding the truth of the Jiva, who we actually are. What is the, the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita is so nice because it has all these different tattvas, these principles, Maya Tattva. What are the principles of illusion? It's all systematically there. Jiva Tattva. What is the science of the Tattva of the individual beings, us? Krishna Tattva. What are the truths, the principles of Krishna? There's so many tattvas. Nam Tattva. What are the principles of chanting the holy name? A lot of religions, all these things are found, but you kind of have to find them yourself, and there's hints here and there. But what's nice that many of our acharyas, like the 6 Goswamis, they have organized all these tattvas systematically. So if you want to know what is, Maya Tattva, what are the principles of illusion? And then you can find so many things given, all the verses that deal with that, so you can get a full understanding of what illusion actually is. Did you have a comment or question? Yes.
Yeah, why are we so fearful of that?
Because it's natural, because we're identified with something that's dying. Think about it. Everything around us is in a state of decay. So if my identity is invested in this body and in this mind, I see everybody around me, these bodies are dying, they're getting old, some gray hair starts coming, some wrinkles start appearing. I'm going to die because the identification is so strong with the body. It's natural to be fearful of death. But in this life, there's a possibility of realizing that we're not the body. There's a divine spark in the heart. And if that identity awakens, if we awaken to the truth of that, then we just see this passing of the body. Oh, it's not me, actually. It's a material thing that's going to pass away because that's the nature of matter. It's born, it grows. Sorry?
The purpose of the fearfulness?
Well, yes, actually, you kind of mentioned that a little bit too. You could say the reason why it's there and we have to kind of deal with this situation is because it may give us a sense of urgency. What is eternal? That question can come. Why do I have to die? Prabhupada explains that in a nice conversation. He says a real human being becomes very, very interested in this question. Why do I have to die? Why do I suffer? What happens after death? That will lead a person, if they're really sincerely seeking those answers, will lead them to a place where they can find those answers. Yeah.
In fact, the entire Srimad Bhagavatam springs from this question.
Yeah.
What is the duty of a man about to die? And you could say, what about to die? Well, Parikshit Maharaj was due to die in 7 days, but we all don't know when we're about to die. We say it's not a threat, it's just a reality. And actually just this morning or last night, I was remembering a young woman who was serving Krishna lunch. She was very involved. And it was when I was going to UF and I was singing, and so she knew me and she appreciated kirtan and things like that. But she got into some kind of motorcycle accident. So she was really a beloved participant of Krishna lunch. And I remember coming to the memorial, and it was so striking because she was young and beautiful and so full of life, had her whole future ahead of her, and then suddenly this terrible accident. And we could probably, all of us, quote like dozens of examples of maybe even people we know or people that are just a few degrees separated from us, of people who died in an untimely way. And so we tend to think, I'll just live forever. And why do we have that tendency to think, well, I'm just going to live forever? It's because there's also a part of the soul that feels, I do live forever. And so there's the sense that well, those stories are for the people out there, but not me. And on a deeper level, the soul does not die. And so there's that default to tend to go back to well, it's okay. I'm going to keep going. But really, this question that Parikshit Maharaj asked, what is the duty of a man about to die, is the question that we're all meant to ask. We're all about to die. And in fact, death, as we were saying, is not just about the material body, it's loss also. And last night I was rereading a blog post, some of the first blog posts that I wrote about 18 years ago. I was 20, and I was reading these posts, and I was thinking, I didn't even remember this happened. It was such a profound experience. I wrote about it on my blog. I shared it. I even got comments from people. And when I was reading it, I had completely forgotten. And that's what's happening all the time. We are constantly also forgetting even profound experiences, even beautiful, wonderful experiences. They're forgotten. So we're always in a state of loss. And sometimes we have stronger samskaras that impress upon us, and we don't forget those as easily. Sometimes we wish we would forget them, and those samskaras will stay with us until we process them. But in general, we're always in a state of loss. And so realizing I'm always losing memories, I'm losing capacity, I'm losing everything all the time. And so understanding this fear of death, it's a very important question to understand. What is the purpose? Maybe there is a purpose there of having fear, and you could even say is a mark of someone who is wise, to realize that I am mortal and I need to think about the most important things in my life.
Actually, yeah, if you think about it, even people who are doing pretty well, have good karma in this material world, or they feel satisfied or happy. But all of us experience on a very deep level, we can't fully be happy in a place where everything is passing away. Everything, like you're saying, everything is forgotten. So a lot of times there's a depression in all of us, but it's very, very deep. It's because we know on a very deep level that we're actually wasting time. It's like time is passing, but we're also not perfectly utilizing time as it passes for the highest goal of life, to find out what is eternal. So every living being is living and doing so many things, but on a very deep level, time is passing, ticking. I'm getting older, and somehow on a deep level, we know that, am I actually utilizing my time properly? I'm going after this, I'm going after that, but those things that I'm also trying to grab are also in a state of decay. This is a Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He gives this very powerful image, how you're in an ocean and there's nothing that really hold on to in an ocean. Everything is gradually sinking, including you. You may find something temporary that stays a little bit longer than you, and you're holding on to that, but also with time, that's also going down. So if one actually has realization that this is the reality, then one becomes very serious and sincere about how to attain my eternal position, how to attain eternal life. Who can lead me there? Does it really exist? I'll never actually know an answer to that by just theoretical scanning of books and speculating, but I actually have to follow a process and find those who actually have realization that they are eternal beings. That's the only way the answer is going to come. So we shouldn't expect the answer before we really achieve a certain level of purification. Because as the material mind and these attachments and aversions, they're all within our chitta and our consciousness. As they begin to dissolve, then the consciousness becomes so clear and stable that one can have a realization of who they actually are. And just the example of given like on a lake. If you look at a clear lake, if it's turbulent and filled with so many dust and particles, you can't see to the bottom of it. But if it becomes completely still and crystal clear, then you can look and see what's at the very bottom. So our consciousness is like that. It's covered right now with so many impressions, so many desires, so many habits. If you can achieve a certain cleansing of the consciousness, which really primarily comes from chanting God's name. Think about every day, as soon as you try to chant, you'll see the desires come up. What happened? Your mind gets very busy. You'll see everything that's there coming to the surface. But if you can not indulge and not enter into all that, but keep just returning to the sound of the name of God, then the first effect of that is Cheto Darpana Marjanam. The chitta becomes cleansed from all the dust. And then it's a mirror. Then it's like clean and reflective like a mirror. And then what reflects in the mirror once it's clean? So that's also described. It's Bhagavat Bimba Grahitvam. When your heart and your chitta becomes cleansed, you see yourself, the true Atma, then you realize you're eternal. Then fear is gone. But besides that, you also see Paramatma. You see God. You see a reflection of God's form in your chitta, in your consciousness. So that pure, clean vision is there, but it's covered by so many things right now. So there has to be some kind of process or method to begin to cleanse that covering so that we can see who we are and who God is, beyond just theory and beyond books and people telling us so many things. Everyone's speculating in so many ways, so many different philosophers. Good luck just trying to find out. But the sincere person thinks, but what can I do to really find out, to have anubhav, my own realization of this? I know it says it in books, but how do I get a realization? And the realization comes, and it's very mysterious, but it comes from chanting the name of God. Because the name and the person are non-different. That's a difficult thing to understand. But to just try to give a little understanding, on the spiritual platform, everything is united. There's still variety, but it's all one thing. So a person's name and their form and their body and their activities, it's all one thing. But if that person were to fall into the material platform, the material dimension, then everything splits up in parts. So the name is different now from the person. The name is different. Everything, that's the nature of the material world. Things become pratak, they become separated. But if you were to rise, your consciousness was to rise up higher and higher back to the spiritual platform, then everything unites as one thing, even though there's still variety. So it's true that God and his name are actually identical on the spiritual platform, but here we are down here trying to have a realization of that. It's difficult. We can't imagine how that could be true. But by repeating it with a clean heart and starting to overcome some offenses and becoming critical of others, a lot of things have to go along with the chanting. But if all that's put in place and you continue to chant, you can get the realization that when you say just the word Krishna, you're in direct contact with God himself. And imagine what that does to you if you directly come in the presence of God. It transforms you, it purifies your heart, and you have experience of love, of a relationship that's eternal. So this is our method.
Yes, and what Ghanashyam Prabhu is describing is what any authentic religion of the world would espouse, to purify the heart, something that you can actually do within your own power to come back to God through chanting the holy name and through spiritual practices to cleanse the mind. That is our responsibility. And what is being described in this verse is the conditions of being in this world, of being conditioned living entities. There is nothing you can do to overcome them. There is just simply nothing. It's pointing out that this place is not our home. It's not where we belong, because this will always be the conditions. This is how Lord Brahma created this universe, is with these 5 kleshas and more. So we'll always be under these influences if we are here. But at the same time, being here in this world, to take responsibility for our own spiritual lives and to do those practices. I mean, there's a sense of agency there. It's why we're all gathered here today. And it's why we even want to pursue spiritual life, to also acknowledge that it is a very special pursuit and that it is not an ordinary thing to be gathering at 8 a.m. on a Friday to discuss these matters. Most people are not discussing this and actually reflecting on the goal of life and why we are here. And outside of being in this discussion, having some kind of spiritual practice that purifies the heart and purifies the mind. So ultimately seeing that the goal is to connect to God, but also to see that this place is not my home, and knowing that I will always have this conditioned experience being, because these are the conditions of being here, this ignorance, identification with the body and the mind, attachment, aversion, the fear of death, this will always be here. And knowing that if I truly want eternal relationships, and I don't want to always feel that with the slightest disturbance, this lake will start, the dust will come back up again, right? And knowing that the mirror can become clouded again and I can fall away. This is just, even in spiritual traditions, people come, go, rise to the surface, and then lose interest, right? So knowing that eternality, the cornerstone of the pain of being in this world comes from the temporariness and this identification with the body, which is temporary, and then the fear of losing relationships and the body, everything comes from there. So I want my relationships to be eternal, everything to actually last and not end. And it is never going to be here. It is never going to be here. It is always going to be in the spiritual world, in a place where the relationships are eternal, and those and that chanting the name won't just get covered over again, but truly a connection that I can cultivate with love.
So if there's any reflections, thoughts, comments, questions, yes, we will. Hare Krishna.
So thank you very much. This is nice, nice class, combination of both. You were talking about the tattvas. It's very interesting. There is Jiva Tattva, there is Sakti Tattva, there is Shiva Tattva, there is Brahma Tattva, so does Vishnu Tattva. And the Mataji was saying, avidya. Bhuliya rahila tumi avidyara bhare. The whole material world is ignorance. So unless we differentiate between the tattvas, we know our identity, we all will remain in ignorance. Even though those who are going to school, college, university, have big degrees, still avidya. That's what Prabhupada says. It's nothing else but slaughterhouse. So therefore, when we differentiate that who we are, that we are the spirit soul, Aham Brahmasmi, then we cannot come out of this material world. We will remain forever ignorance. So therefore, we need spiritual master who could make us understand, as you mentioned very nicely, that first thing is that we have to chant Hare Krishna. Then just gradually all the elements will be cleansed and it will come out. Thank you. It's nice.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Nice class.
Yeah, it's a nice, it made me think of a nice example too, to make it very clear, is that when you're dreaming, right? So if we're all in this dream state, so you're dreaming at night, whatever you achieve in your dream, you may be very intelligent. In your dream, you could be going to school, getting degrees, but in one sense, the real thing, the real life begins when a person wakes up. So if this material world sometimes is compared to like a dream, you know, there's a reality to it. Obviously, you know, we're touching things, there's something real. It's not completely false. But everyone is covered as if, you know, their ambitions and to go after this and do that, and some are intelligent, some are not intelligent, but it's all under a state of like a dream. And the really intelligent person, we want to find those who actually wake up to a higher life and a higher possibility. So all the differences between us in a dream, what does it matter if it's everyone dreaming? You could have lots of money, you could have no money. You could have lots of intelligence, no intelligence, but everyone can share this in common, that they're in a dream state, but there's a possibility of awakening by the grace of a devotee who informs us of all this and shares these tattvas and things like you're sharing. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
And on that note, the material world is defined by the fact that it is temporary. That is why it is an illusion. So not so much that it's it's false. It's not that it's false. It's the fact that it's temporary. So this knowledge gaining, and I work at a college. I teach in a college, but it's temporary knowledge. So it will go away. And so in that sense, it's still ignorance. It's avidya, but true knowledge is eternal. So I appreciate that point you brought out, and that it can only be brought out by somebody who is outside of this world. So you were mentioning it also, a spiritual master, somebody who can help us out of it again. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes.
Thank you both. Hare Krishna. I have to recognize something in the purport. It comes as a Brahma's magic wand. And I want to ask, in the world where we live in this perpetual grief, as you mentioned, there are coping mechanisms for dealing with that. And some of them are very destructive. And the culture we live in makes it even worse or more compounded, like the world of substance abuse, the world of entertainment, the way we numb ourselves just to forget that sense of loss that we are exposed to, existential. So, and you mentioned the holy names. What are the other ways that we can find courage and encouragement while we are simultaneously trying to immerse ourselves, but in the same time we are submerged in such a destructive culture?
Yeah, it's a great point and a great question, because it's everybody seeking for some way of coping or some kind of shelter from these 5 conditions. We're entrapped, as Prabhupada says, by these 5 conditions. So everybody's seeking some place to go. And the temptation is to get something very quick and immediate that can give me some pleasure. That's the danger, because it's very fast and immediate. It's a shelter for me. It gives me a little relief. But because that thing also is just a material object. All material objects are coming when the creation is described. They're manifestations of tamas. So by associating even with material objects, it brings our consciousness down. So everyone's seeking some kind of shelter, whatever it may be. For some people, it's sports. For some people, it's drugs. For some people, it's political things happening, and whatever. It's just all a place we're trying to go to get something that we're lacking. And like you said, some of those are very destructive. So what is the shelter on the spiritual path? Primarily, it's the sadhu sangha, the association of people who are really striving for what's eternal, what's pure, having relationship, interaction, real love. Because as soon as people are actually striving for what's true and eternal, in one sense, they've come to another level of love, with also vision. Some people love, but it can, without vision, it becomes a little sentimental. It becomes an attachment or a clinging. But also when you start to see truth and reality and you're striving for it with like-minded people, then this love, that the attachment actually will help you rather than bind you. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he told some of his disciples, now don't fall away from the spiritual path because I've become attached to you. And if you fall away and just become a conditioned being again, then I have attachment to you. So then I'll be attached to something also then material, and that won't help me. It's interesting, right? It's like stay on this path because I love you and I'm attached and and if you stay, then this attachment will be something real and eternal, will benefit all of us. So we want to be attached to the devotees, the real shelters. And it's always going to be relationship, which is the real shelter. Loving relationship, because that's ultimately what we're hankering for. An exchange of love. That is the spiritual world. That's what's happening there. So loving exchange. So with those on the path, we have, we hear together. We chant together. We distribute prasadam with each other. We give gifts to each other. All of this, these are the loving exchanges Rupa Goswami describes in Upadeshamrita. So with all these sweet ways of interacting, that is the shelter, but with the right kind of people, with the right consciousness, on the right path and direction, then it becomes so satisfying to have. As you know, the deep relationship you've had with so many great souls in your life, and you can just remember those experiences. I think nothing compares to that. We can all say that if we've really had some of those experiences. So that is the shelter. So therefore, we want to be very careful how we interact and relate. That we're kind, that we're encouraging, that we're all serving each other in that way towards the supreme object, Krishna. He's the Ashraya. This is Ashraya Tattva. We talked about all different tattvas. What is the tattva of the actual shelter in life? Ashraya Tattva. And this is Bhagavatam, 10th cantos. It finally comes to Krishna as the Ashraya Tattva. He is the place where you can completely put your desire for shelter and for love. And his devotees, of course, are doing this together. So that's the real place of fulfillment.
So the question is always, how do I ensure that I'm associating the devotees as devotees and not just in a cultural or a superficial or shallow way? And understanding that when it's undergirded, also a really very important thread is the scripture, and that even if we're doing service together, if it's not grounded in truth, and that if we aren't resonating on the why are we doing this? If we aren't connecting on that level, then sometimes it can come and go, that service. So if we're doing service, ensuring that we know why we're doing this service, and that actually the study of the scriptures is what will maintain us in the long term. And that the relationships, it's so beautiful that he was saying that we have that sweetness. I was reading in a book, and it kind of resonated for me that sometimes when we're seeking in the book Healing Power of Illness, it was saying about we're craving sweets or craving sour. It's like what is that about? And if I find that I'm resonated for me, that if I'm craving this sweetness a lot, I'm like, I take a moment. I'm craving sweetness in my relationships. How can I pause, but how can I make sure it's authentic sweetness and not just sentimental or superficial? And realizing that is where all of the rasa comes from. That's what I'm seeking in anything, whether it's any kind of substance, and people can abuse anything, or any food, any substance, anything can be abused in this material world. So what is that? And the core of all of it is relationships, loving relationships. And if I can learn how to have authentic connections with Krishna in the center, then that will be truly satisfying. And that's where the real shelter is. So I also appreciate very much your explanation of that and that response. It's very much a reminder for myself, that tendency to seek shelter in other things that are not going to actually satisfy.
Okay. Sorry, we run out of time. Nice to be with all of you. Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavatam ki.